India on Sunday formally handed over the G20 presidency to Brazil. At the closing ceremony of the annual summit of the grouping that was held in New Delhi this weekend, India has had the presidency of the G20 since December the 1st, when it took over from Indonesia. It will continue to hold the position until the end of November. Now, during the two-day summit, the bloc adopted a consensus declaration that made commitments on several issues, including that of food and energy security, as well as climate change and global debt vulnerabilities. Let's get the latest from SABC News correspondent on G20 Summit underway in India, Ishan. Garg, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC again. Perhaps you could just bring us the latest and how, after the joint statement, everything was received regarding, what was spoken about in regards to the Ukraine conflict, climate change, poverty, amongst many other issues that emerged.
Well, there have been a variety of responses. I'll start off what the response has been in India. First of all, the joint communique is being seen as a massive success by many people in India. They are saying that this is a sign of India's growing diplomatic clout around the world, that it's been able to get together all these different parties with competing interests and geopolitical tensions on one table, and has been able to get a document out that reflects the viewpoints of differing countries. Even Indian officials have said that this was a negotiation that went on for days, went on in a very intense manner. But the reaction from elsewhere has not been so positive. For example, from Ukraine, there has been some sharp criticism of the wording of the part of the communique where the war in Ukraine has been mentioned. The spokesperson of the external ministry in Ukraine has said that this is not something G20 grouping should be proud of. They are saying that the document fails to mention Russia as the aggressor. It fails to say that the war is against Ukraine. Instead, it says that the war is in Ukraine. So these are things that the Ukrainian government is not happy about. But from India's perspective and from the perspective of its closest allies, including Russia, they are saying that this communique is a success of India's G20 presidency.
Ishan, thank you for that. I wonder, as we also look at those who were in attendance, what the impact of Xi Jinping's lack of presence at the summit meant, and even Vladimir Putin at this point, and how it affects the future of G20 and its relevance as well.
Well, the absence of President Putin and President Xi Jinping has raised questions about how can the G20 grouping function together with these varying geopolitical tensions between different countries. But some are also saying that this also brings to light the fault lines between India and China as well. Experts in India are saying that because India was the president of the G20 grouping this year, it's probably why China's president chose not to attend this summit, because they may not have wanted to look like they were endorsing something that India had put together, and that's just perhaps because of the tensions between India and China along the border. Russian president's absence on this summit has, according to experts, given the G7 bloc, particularly the US, the image that they care more about the geopolitical tensions worldwide. They care more about economic problems of different countries, and it's also certainly given many countries that were present at the G20 summit a certain moral high ground, because they talked extensively about sustainable development. They talked about how developing countries in the global south, including in African continents, could benefit from the G20 grouping, especially with the inclusion of the African Union. So experts say that Russia's and China's absence, their heads of state's absence rather, may sometimes be perceived as they probably do not care about these issues as much as the G7 countries, or as much as India.
Ishan, let me wrap up this conversation now that the AU is also going to be having a seat at the table. India wrapping up or holding its position until the end of November, obviously, and then it's handed over to Brazil. Walk us through what the influence of that is going to be in terms of the dynamics unfolding.
Well, African Union's inclusion is going to be a great deal, and going forward, India is going to focus a lot on the things that have been agreed upon during this summit. India is going to take a stock of how things have developed up until November. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that he would want to invite the world leaders once again together for a virtual session to take a stock of how things have progressed in the next 2 months. They would particularly talk about climate change, because India has said that the developing countries need close to $3 trillion to offset their carbon footprint. They need about $3 trillion to transition from fossil fuels to green energy. And all of these steps that have been announced, including things on climate change, including adding liquidity for the developing countries so that they can get better access to funding, these developments will be discussed once again perhaps in November. That's what the Prime Minister of India has called for. It remains to be seen if that virtual summit does go ahead, but if it does, it will mainly be to take a stock of how India's presidency has been for the past 1 year.
Ishan Garg, SABC News correspondent, thank you for that update live from New Delhi.